it didn't begin with a speech. It began with silence and unsettling. Calculated silence between Princess Anne and Charles III that insiders say lasted far longer than it should have. No cameras, no aides. Just a closed-door exchange that, according to whispers, would redefine the monarchy's future. And when the doors finally opened, something had shifted, something irreversible. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What made this moment so extraordinary was not simply the secrecy, but the weight of what it implied. A highly confidential meeting of this scale, held without the usual layers of protocol, immediately raised questions that could not be ignored. Palace staff were reportedly cleared from nearby corridors, an act so rare that even seasoned insiders found it unsettling. No footsteps, no murmurs, just a controlled vacuum of silence, as though the very walls had been instructed to forget what they heard. Those closest to the situation would later describe the atmosphere as tense and historic, a phrase that lingered long after the doors reopened. Reports suggest documents were laid out during that meeting, documents tied not just to ceremonial duties, but to authority itself. Authority over decisions that shaped the monarchy's direction, its image, and perhaps even its survival. The absence of any official statement only deepened the mystery. For a family so carefully curated in the public eye, silence of this magnitude spoke louder than any announcement ever could. It hinted at internal deliberations so sensitive that even acknowledgement could spark consequences. And then came the subtle details, the way Anne emerged composed but resolute, the way Charles carried a quiet heaviness that could not be concealed. These were not the gestures of routine discussion. They were the aftershocks of something far more significant, something that insiders now suggest may have been building for years beneath the surface. A slow, invisible pressure that had finally reached its breaking point, because this was never just about a meeting. It was about a system confronting itself, about decisions that could redefine roles, reshape influence, and challenge long-standing traditions that had remained untouched for generations. And as speculation continues to grow, one reality becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. This moment may have been the beginning of a shift no one inside the monarchy can fully control. But what was discussed behind those doors wasn't just about the present. It reached deep into the monarchy's past, and an unresolved legacy now demanding answers. For decades, the monarchy stood as an unshaken symbol of continuity. But beneath its polished surface, insiders now suggest fractures have been forming quietly, steadily, and dangerously. And now, those fractures may finally be impossible to ignore. The truth is, what appeared to the public as unwavering stability was, in reality, a carefully maintained balance, one shaped over generations, but tested more in recent years than ever before. Much of that strength had been anchored during the reign of Elizabeth II, whose presence alone seemed to hold the institution together through sheer consistency and discipline. She represented a fixed point in a rapidly changing world, a figure whose authority was rarely questioned, and whose decisions carried the quiet certainty of experience. But with her absence, that sense of unbreakable continuity began to feel less certain, almost as if the invisible threads that held everything together had loosened just enough to expose what lay beneath. What followed was not an immediate collapse, but a slow and subtle shift. Expectations that had once been unquestioned began to evolve. The public, more aware and more vocal than ever before, started demanding transparency, accountability, and relevance from an institution built on tradition and distance. And inside those palace walls, the pressure did not go unnoticed. Reports began to surface, quiet at first, then increasingly difficult to dismiss, suggesting that not everyone agreed on how the monarchy should respond. Some believed adaptation was necessary, even urgent. Others saw change as a threat, something that could weaken the very foundation they had spent their lives protecting. At the center of this growing divide stood Princess Anne, a figure long regarded as the embodiment of duty and discipline. Her role, as insiders often describe it, has never been about popularity or public approval. It has been about preservation, protecting the structure, the rules, the quiet machinery that keeps the monarchy functioning even when the world outside demands something entirely different. She does not bend easily, and perhaps that is precisely why her influence has remained so powerful. To her, the monarchy is not something to be reshaped at will. It is something to be defended, don't even when that defense comes at a cost. Yet across from her stands a very different challenge. Charles III, now carrying the full weight of leadership, finds himself navigating a path that is anything but straightforward. His position is not just ceremonial, it is deeply personal, shaped by years of waiting, years of observing, and now, years of confronting realities he cannot ignore. He faces pressures from every direction, the legacy he must honor, the expectations he must meet, and the future he is expected to secure. And within that tension lies a question that refuses to go away. Should the monarchy remain exactly as it has always been, rooted in tradition and resistant to change? Or should it evolve, carefully but decisively, to survive in a world that no longer accepts silence as strength? That question has not been answered, not fully, not yet. Instead, it lingers in every decision, every conversation, every moment of hesitation behind closed doors. It creates a quiet but constant strain, one that insiders suggest has been building for far longer than anyone is willing to admit. Because when an institution built on certainty begins to question itself, even slightly, the impact is never small. It spreads, slowly but surely, touching every layer of its structure. And now, that spread has reached a point where it can no longer remain hidden. Because if the cracks were already there, then what followed was not just another moment of tension, it was something far more decisive, something that did not simply expose the fractures, but forced everyone to confront them head-on. But if the cracks were already there, what truly shook the foundation was not history, but a move that insiders are now calling a turning point. It wasn't announced publicly. It wasn't even acknowledged. But according to palace whispers, a single decision made quietly and executed swiftly may have triggered everything that followed. At first, it appeared insignificant, almost routine, kind of internal adjustment that rarely escapes the walls of the institution. But this was different. Reports suggest that behind that silence lay a strategic shift in responsibilities, one that subtly, yet powerfully, altered the balance within the senior royal circle. It did not arrive with ceremony or explanation. It arrived as a change in motion, a recalibration that insiders claim was felt before it was understood. And that is precisely what made it so unsettling. Because when something this consequential happens without acknowledgement, it does not reduce its importance, it amplifies it. Those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy now suggest that what unfolded was not a spontaneous decision, but the result of growing pressure that had been building beneath the surface for months, perhaps even years. A reassessment of roles had long been overdue, whispered about in cautious conversations, but never fully addressed. The structure that once operated with rigid clarity had begun to blur, with overlapping responsibilities and unspoken tensions creating an environment where authority was no longer as clearly defined as it once had been. And in that uncertainty, questions began to rise, questions about who truly holds influence, who shapes decisions, and who ultimately determines the direction of the crown. At the heart of this shift stood Princess Anne, whose insistence on clarity is said to have played a decisive role. Insiders claim she had grown increasingly concerned about the lack of defined authority lines, viewing it not as a minor issue, but as a fundamental risk to the institution's stability. To her, ambiguity was not flexibility, it was vulnerability. And vulnerability within a system built on precision and control could not be allowed to persist. Her push for structure was not sudden. It was deliberate, calculated, and rooted in a deep understanding of how easily disorder can take hold when boundaries are not firmly established. But such a push does not happen in isolation. It creates pressure, and that pressure inevitably finds its way to the top. Charles III, already navigating the weight of leadership, now faced a growing expectation to respond not gradually, but decisively. Reports suggest that the moment demanded more than reflection. It demanded action. And yet, action in such a context is never simple. Every decision carries consequences, not just for the present, but for the future the monarchy is trying to secure. To act too quickly risks destabilizing delicate balances. To delay risks allowing uncertainty to deepen. And so, the tension intensified not publicly but behind closed doors, where every discussion carried the weight of what could no longer be avoided. Insiders now claim that this single move, quiet as it may have seemed, forced conversations that had been postponed for far too long. Conversations about succession planning, about the evolving role of senior royals, and about the direction the monarchy must take in a world that no longer allows ambiguity to go unnoticed. It brought unspoken disagreements into focus, turning private concerns into unavoidable realities. And with that shift came a realization that could not be ignored. This was no longer about maintaining appearances or preserving tradition at all costs. It was about confronting a deeper issue, one that touched the very core of how the institution functions. Because when authority begins to shift, even subtly, it does more than change roles. It reshapes relationships. It redefines influence. It forces those within the system to reconsider where they stand and what they are willing to protect. And as these changes unfolded, slowly but unmistakably, the atmosphere within the monarchy grew heavier, charged with a tension that could no longer be contained by silence alone. What began as a quiet adjustment had now evolved into something far more significant, a moment of reckoning that demanded clarity, demanded decisions, and above all, demanded control. And as tensions rose behind closed doors, it became clear it wasn't just about structure anymore. It was about control. Power inside the monarchy has never been as simple as titles. It lives in influence, in access, in decisions made far from public view. And now, that power appears to be shifting. What once seemed like a rigid, unbreakable hierarchy is now revealing layers of tension that cannot be ignored. Reports suggest that behind the formal roles and carefully maintained appearances, differing visions have begun to emerge among senior members of the royal family. These are not loud, public disagreements. They are quiet, controlled, and far more dangerous because of it. They unfold in private conversations, in subtle decisions, and in the absence of consensus where unity once defined the institution. At the center of this evolving dynamic stands Princess Anne, whose reputation as an iron-willed enforcer of royal protocol has long set her apart. She is not easily swayed by changing public sentiment or external pressure. For her, the monarchy is a system built on discipline, structure, and unwavering commitment to duty. Insiders often describe her approach as uncompromising, even when the cost of that rigidity becomes clear. And in moments like this, when uncertainty begins to creep into the foundation, her presence becomes even more significant. She does not simply observe shifts in power, she responds to them, often with a determination that reshapes the conversation entirely. But the monarchy is no longer operating in the same world it once did, and that reality is something Charles III cannot ignore. Positioned between tradition and the growing need for reform, he faces a challenge that few before him have had to navigate in quite the same way. The expectations are no longer singular. They are divided, pulling him in different directions at once. On one side lies the weight of legacy, the responsibility to preserve what has been built over generations. On the other lies the undeniable pressure to adapt, to evolve in ways that ensure the monarchy remains relevant in a world that demands transparency and change. Balancing those forces is not just difficult, it is defining. As these tensions deepen, insiders suggest that the question of who truly shapes the monarchy's future has become increasingly difficult to answer. Authority is no longer just about position. It is about influence, about who is heard, and whose vision ultimately guides the decisions that matter most. And with that uncertainty comes speculation, quiet at first, but growing louder, about alliances forming within palace walls. Not alliances in the traditional sense, but alignments of perspective, of shared belief about what the monarchy should become. These alignments do not announce themselves. They reveal themselves gradually, through patterns, through decisions, through moments where support is given or withheld. The risk in all of this is not simply internal disagreement. It is the possibility that those disagreements begin to affect the monarchy's image, the very perception that has sustained it for so long. Unity has always been its strength, its most powerful symbol. But when unity is questioned, even subtly, it introduces doubt. And doubt, once it takes hold, is difficult to contain. The public may not see every detail, but it senses change. It notices when something feels different, when the balance that once seemed effortless begins to show strain. Because power, when it shifts, does not do so quietly forever. It leaves traces. It creates moments that demand interpretation, moments that force those within the system to confront realities they may have preferred to avoid. And as those moments begin to accumulate, the struggle becomes impossible to dismiss as temporary or insignificant. It becomes something larger, something that speaks to the very nature of the institution itself. And as this struggle continues to unfold, growing more complex with each passing decision, a deeper question begins to emerge, one that cuts through the surface and reaches something far more fundamental. But the deeper this struggle went, the more one question began to surface: what truth has been hidden all along? For years, certain truths were carefully managed, softened, or simply left unspoken. But now, insiders suggest that silence is no longer an option, and the consequences of speaking out could be monumental. What once lived quietly beneath the surface is beginning to rise, not all at once, but in fragments, whispers that refuse to stay contained, questions that no longer fade as easily as they once did. The monarchy has always understood the power of silence, the way it can protect, preserve, and maintain control. But silence, when stretched too far, begins to change. It stops protecting and starts revealing. And that shift, subtle at first, is now becoming impossible to ignore. There is a growing sense, both inside and outside the institution, that transparency is no longer a distant expectation but an immediate demand. Reports suggest that decisions made in the past, once considered settled, closed, and beyond reconsideration, are now being quietly revisited. Not publicly, not with announcements, but through internal reflection that carries far more weight than any statement ever could. These are not small adjustments. They are re-evaluations of choices that shaped the monarchy's path, choices that now seem less certain in a world that demands accountability at every level. And with each reassessment comes a deeper realization that the past cannot simply remain untouched. It must be understood, even if that understanding comes at a cost. At the center of this growing pressure stands Princess Anne, whose position appears increasingly clear in the face of uncertainty. Insiders suggest she has become one of the strongest voices advocating for honesty over image, for confronting difficult realities rather than allowing them to remain buried beneath layers of tradition. To her, preserving the monarchy does not mean shielding it from truth. It means ensuring that it can withstand truth without losing its foundation. That distinction is critical, and it is one that sets her approach apart. Because in moments like this, when the weight of silence begins to fracture, the question is no longer whether the truth will surface, but how it will be handled when it does. For Charles III, that question carries a complexity that cannot be overstated. He is not only the figure expected to guide the monarchy forward, but also the one who must reconcile its past with its future. The expectations placed upon him are immense, shaped by legacy, by responsibility, and by a public that is no longer willing to accept distance without explanation. He must navigate a path that does not offer clear answers, where every decision risks either exposing too much or revealing too little. And within that delicate balance lies the challenge that defines this moment. Because to move forward without acknowledging the past risks losing credibility, but to confront the past too directly risks unsettling the very structure he is trying to protect. This tension is not theoretical. It is real, and it is growing. Public trust, once considered an unshakable pillar of the monarchy's strength, is now becoming one of its most fragile elements. It is no longer enough to rely on tradition alone. Trust must be maintained, reinforced, and in some cases, rebuilt. And that process requires something the institution has historically approached with caution openness. The possibility of a shift in how the monarchy presents itself is no longer distant speculation. It is a conversation happening now, quietly but persistently, shaping decisions that will define what comes next. Because once truth begins to surface, it does not retreat easily. It demands acknowledgement. It forces clarity. It challenges the systems that once depended on its absence. And as this process unfolds, slowly but inevitably, the monarchy finds itself at a crossroads unlike any it has faced before. A moment where the cost of silence may outweigh the risk of revelation, where the choice is no longer between comfort and disruption, but between survival and decline. And as the truth edges closer to the surface, one final decision remains: what comes next for the crown itself. The monarchy has survived wars, scandals, and centuries of change. But insiders now believe it stands at one of its most defining crossroads yet, where the choices made today will echo for generations. What makes this moment different is not just the pressure from the outside world, but the unmistakable realization from within that the old ways may no longer be enough on their own. There is a growing sense that the structure, once seen as untouchable, is now being quietly reconsidered, not dismantled, not abandoned, but reshaped with a level of urgency that has rarely been acknowledged before. And while no formal declaration has been made, the signs are there, hidden in subtle shifts, in decisions that suggest a future being carefully recalibrated. Speculation has begun to build around what that future might look like. Some insiders suggest a more streamlined monarchy, one that operates with fewer moving parts, fewer layers, and a sharper focus on efficiency and relevance. Others believe that such a transformation, while necessary, risks losing something far more valuable: the depth of tradition that has defined the institution for generations. This is the tension that now defines the conversation. It is not simply about change. It is about how much change can be absorbed before the very identity of the monarchy begins to shift in ways that cannot be reversed. Within this uncertainty, Princess Anne continues to play a role that is both stabilizing and uncompromising. Her influence remains rooted in the belief that certain foundations must never be altered, no matter how strong the pressure becomes. To her, the monarchy is not just a system to be managed, it is a legacy to be protected. And that protection requires discipline, clarity, and a refusal to let temporary challenges dictate permanent change. Her presence serves as a reminder that while adaptation may be necessary, it must never come at the cost of the institution's core principles. At the same time, Charles III finds himself in a position that demands more than preservation alone. He is not only the guardian of the past, but also the architect of what comes next. The decisions before him are not simple adjustments. They are defining choices that will determine how the monarchy exists in a world that is constantly evolving. He must find a way to honor the legacy he inherited, while ensuring that the institution remains strong enough to face what lies ahead. And that balance between holding on and letting go is where the true challenge lies. Beyond them, another layer of uncertainty begins to take shape. The next generation, waiting in the wings, is not untouched by these shifts. Their roles, their expectations, and their place within the monarchy are all being quietly shaped by the decisions being made now. They represent continuity, but also possibility. And in that dual role, they become part of a future that is still being written, one decision at a time. The question that now lingers is not just about structure or leadership. It is something deeper, more fundamental. What will the monarchy become when these choices are finally made? Will it emerge stronger, more defined, more aligned with the world around it? Or will the process of change reveal challenges that cannot be easily contained? These are the uncertainties that hang over this moment, shaping every conversation, every hesitation, every decision that moves the institution forward. Because this is not simply a period of adjustment. It is a turning point, one that forces the monarchy to look at itself with a level of honesty it has rarely embraced. And in that reflection lies both risk and possibility, both tension and transformation. Because in the end, this was never just about power or protocol, it was about the survival of an institution now forced to confront its own truth. Every decision within the monarchy carries consequences, some immediate, others unfolding quietly over time. And now, those consequences are beginning to take shape. What once seemed like contained discussions and controlled adjustments has started to ripple outward, touching every layer of the institution in ways that can no longer be dismissed as temporary or insignificant. Reports suggest that internal changes, subtle at first, are now influencing the day-to-day operations of the royal structure itself. Responsibilities are shifting, expectations are being recalibrated, and the rhythm that once defined the monarchy's stability is beginning to feel different, more uncertain, more deliberate, and far more closely watched than before. These shifts are not happening in isolation. They are being observed, interpreted, and, in many cases, questioned by a public that is increasingly aware of the signals coming from within palace walls. Speculation has begun to grow, not in sudden bursts, but in a steady, persistent way that reflects a deeper curiosity about what is truly happening behind the scenes. The monarchy has always relied on a careful balance between visibility and distance, between what is shared and what is withheld. But that balance is now under strain. The line between privacy and accountability is becoming harder to maintain, and with each passing moment, the pressure to define that boundary more clearly continues to intensify. At the center of this evolving landscape, Princess Anne remains a constant presence, a figure whose role has become even more critical as uncertainty grows. Her approach does not change with circumstances. It remains grounded in discipline, in structure, in the belief that stability is not something that can be improvised. Insiders often point to her as a stabilizing force, someone who understands that when the system begins to shift, it must be anchored by principles that do not. Her influence is not loud, but it is unmistakable, shaping decisions in ways that reinforce continuity even as the environment around her evolves. For Charles III, the situation is far more complex. The scrutiny he faces is no longer limited to ceremonial expectations or public appearances. It extends into the decisions he makes, the direction he chooses, and the way he responds to challenges that do not offer simple solutions. Each choice carries weight, not just in its immediate impact, but in how it will be interpreted over time. And that weight is becoming increasingly difficult to manage in a landscape where every action is analyzed, every silence questioned, and every shift seen as part of a larger narrative. What makes this moment particularly significant is not just the presence of consequences, but the way they are unfolding. Some are visible, clear in their effect, and immediate in their impact. Others are quieter, developing slowly, shaping perceptions and influencing outcomes in ways that may not be fully understood until much later. Together, they work together to achieve a common goal. They form a pattern, one that suggests the monarchy is moving through a period of transformation that cannot be reversed simply by returning to what once worked. The resilience that has defined the institution for generations is being tested once again, not by a single event, but by a series of pressures that are building simultaneously. And within that test lies a deeper realization, one that cannot be ignored no matter how carefully it is managed. The monarchy, as it stands today, is not untouched by what it has faced. It has changed, even if that change is still unfolding, even if it is not yet fully defined. The consequences of recent decisions are not just shaping the present, they are quietly redefining the future. And as those consequences continue to emerge, layer by layer, one truth begins to settle with undeniable clarity. Yet even as consequences unfold, one reality becomes impossible to ignore: the monarchy is no longer what it once was. The truth is no longer hidden. It's no longer whispered behind palace doors. It's here unfolding in real time, and it's forcing the monarchy to confront its most defining question yet. What was once protected by silence has now moved into a space where it can no longer be contained, and that shift changes everything. The monarchy stands at a moment unlike any it has faced before, not because it is under attack, but because it is being forced to look inward with a level of honesty it has long avoided. This is not a sudden collapse or a dramatic unraveling. It is something far more complex. It is a turning point, slow but undeniable, where every decision now carries the weight of what the monarchy will become, not just tomorrow, but for generations to come. At the heart of this moment lies a tension that can no longer be ignored: the balance between tradition and evolution. For centuries, tradition has been the monarchy's greatest strength, its foundation, its identity. But now, that same strength is being tested in ways it was never designed to withstand. The world has changed, expectations have shifted, and the institution finds itself navigating a reality where holding on too tightly to the past may risk losing the future altogether. And yet, letting go is not a simple option, because tradition is not just history, it is legitimacy, it is continuity, it is the very thing that has allowed the monarchy to endure when so many others have faded away. Within this fragile balance stand Princess Anne and Charles III, two figures whose roles in this moment are as different as they are connected. Anne remains unwavering, grounded in the belief that the monarchy must hold firm, that its strength lies in its ability to remain constant, even when the world around it demands change. She represents discipline, structure, and the refusal to compromise on principles that have defined the institution for generations. Charles, on the other hand, carries the burden of transformation. He cannot simply preserve what was, he must shape what comes next. And in doing so, he must navigate a path that offers no clear direction, only choices that come with consequences no one can fully predict. As these forces collide, one reality becomes increasingly clear: Public trust is no longer a passive element of the monarchy's existence. It has become its most critical measure of survival. The days when distance alone could sustain authority are fading. The institution must now engage with a public that expects not just presence, but clarity. Not just tradition, but relevance. And that expectation creates pressure, not just to adapt, but to redefine what the monarchy represents in a world that no longer accepts ambiguity as strength. This is where the true transformation begins. Not in grand declarations or visible changes, but in the quiet reshaping of identity. The monarchy is being redefined, not by a single decision, but by a series of choices that reflect a deeper shift in how it understands itself. It is learning, perhaps for the first time in its modern history, that survival does not come from resisting change entirely, but from understanding which parts of its identity must evolve and which must remain untouched. And that process is neither simple nor comfortable. It is filled with uncertainty, with moments of doubt, and with the constant awareness that every step forward leaves something behind. The future that now begins to take shape may look very different from the past. Not unrecognizable, but altered in ways that will become more apparent over time. The structure may change, the roles may shift, and the expectations placed upon those within it may evolve. But the essence of the monarchy, its purpose, its place will depend entirely on how it navigates this moment. Because this is not just a chapter in its history. It is a test of its ability to endure in a world that no longer guarantees its place. And as the dust begins to settle, one thing is certain: the monarchy's future will not be decided in silence ever again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.